You're listening to Lemon's Listening Library. Discover the story behind the stories with unique and raw conversations from the people who make your favorite books a reality. All right, welcome to this episode of Lemon's Listening Library. I'm your host, Randy Lemons, and R.L. Rose for those of you in the romance community. Today I am joined by my amazing co-host, Ariel. Ariel, would you like to tell the listeners a little bit about yourself?
Hi, I'm Ariel Dawn. I write primarily paranormal romance, monster romance, that sort of thing. But in addition to being a USA Today bestselling author, I am also an avid reader and fangirl. So yeah, that's me.
Now, before we introduce our amazing guest that I'm super excited to talk to today, we are going to do a little bit of housekeeping. If you guys are interested in promoting your books or your services on the show, head over to Patreon and sign up for that, and we can get that going. It's a super great way to support the show and also get your services out there to our listeners and potential clients. All right, guys, I am so excited about today's guest. Jasmine, would you like to introduce yourself and tell our listeners just a little bit about you?
Yeah, so I'm Jasmine Carolina. I have been in the indie world since 2014, actually. I started publishing when I was 19 years old. I pretty much started in the romance genre and then took a hiatus. And when I came back from the hiatus, I dabbled a little bit in dystopian with a co-author, and now I'm doing women's fiction as well as romance. So, just happy to be jumping back into the indie world. And aside from writing, I do collect hobbies, and I'm an avid reader as well. I will fangirl over every single book.
What is your top fangirl book that you're like, that's my thing?
Right now, it's Before I Let Go by Kennedy Ryan.
Wasn't that what you were just talking about, Ariel?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
We're talking about all that good stuff. Yep.
Yeah.
That is awesome. So what was it that kind of pushed you into the writing community and, the storytelling side of things?
Honestly, I've always kind of been a writer. In middle school, I would just kind of write things down in my journal all the time. I did a little bit of poetry. In high school, some of my old friends could tell you I would walk around with a clipboard and loose leaf paper, and I would just be writing all the time. And my counselor, senior year, she had kind of heard from my English lit teacher that I was writing a book, and she's like, "Hey, have you heard about self-publishing?" And I was like, "No, I haven't. So I'm going to look into that." And so once I finally had a story that I was able to actually finish, then I looked into what it would take to self-publish, and I kind of leapt from there.
What was it about writing that, was it kind of like a safe space for you, or was it some kind of a hole that you had?
Um, it was a safe space. It was a form of catharsis. It was a form of escape. Um, it was just a way to get my feelings out there without necessarily sharing them publicly at the time. And then creating something fictional kind of helped me escape in a different way, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it totally gives you control over this world that you can manipulate and have things happen that you want to see how it plays out. And I think that writing as a way of working through stuff, or just like you said, kind of having this other world that you can escape into for a little bit, is such a it kind of like refreshes you to come back into real life.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
So you had this story when you were 19, and your counselor was the one who kind of pushed you into doing that, or was that after?
She had kind of pushed me into exploring self-publishing as another avenue of getting the story out there, but I was already writing the story when she told me about that.
Tell us how that happened. Tell us a little bit about that.
About the story or about
Yeah.
like the journey?
Yeah, well, let's start off with the journey. Let's start off with the beginning and like what made you start writing that story, let's start with the beginning.
This story, I really couldn't tell you where it originally came from. I just kind of sat down and started free writing, and I came up with the first chapter, And I sent it to my friend. I'm like, hey, I wrote this thing and I'd really love some feedback on it. And she's not a huge reader. She'll only read stuff if it's like really good. So I trust her opinions a lot. And
Mm-hmm.
so I was like, I really don't know where I should go with this, but I would love to get your opinion. So I sent it to her and she completely fangirled over it. She's like, oh my God, when there's more, send it to me. And I was like, well, I don't know if I have more. This just kind of came randomly. Um, and so I sat on that one chapter for about 6 months before I went back to it and felt like I had more to add. And once I got past like the 50K mark, I was like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, I might actually finish this one. Before that, I had plenty of stories that I had started and I didn't finish for one reason or another. I have a nice little external hard drive with all my unfinished stuff. And that was the first one that I really felt the pull to take it all the way to the end. And so I knew that was the one that I was going to start my publishing journey with.
That's awesome. I have a question just to kind of like follow up on that. Because I kind of had a similar experience where I had written a lot, but it took like one story to kind of like, be the launch point. Um, when you were writing this, because I can imagine it was in 2014, right? Um,
Yeah.
so how is the landscape different now through self-publishing when you were looking into self-publishing this story then?
Oh, it's completely different. It's something that I've had to uh I kind of felt like I had to go back to the drawing board when I realized I was coming back to publishing because I'm like, oh wow, it's been 10 years since I first published. So things are completely different. Back then, a lot of the stuff was word of mouth. It was a really big community situation where everybody followed everybody and everybody connected with everybody. Um, there was a lot of blog tours and stuff like that. So I did those things. Now those things are not so much prevalent. They still exist and people still do them, but that's not the way that you find your readers anymore. So it took a lot of tweaking my marketing plan this time around and being like, what I threw out the wall and hoped would stick 10 years ago probably won't work now.
Yeah,
Interesting.
yeah, it's a whole new game now.
Mm-hmm.
I 10 years ago is a little bit further back than when I first published, but did you still use Amazon or what did you use for that publishing?
Yeah, I use Amazon. And I think that was before Kindle Unlimited as well. So there was a lot of, you just kind of had to drive people to your book at the time.
That is amazing. Like just to hear that, that is so cool.
Did you ever do you said you were into like fangirling and stuff like that. Did you ever read like fan fiction or that kind of stuff?
I did. I was a big Twilight fan, so I was always on the Twilight website, reading fan fiction on there.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say because the way that sounded, your friend like, okay, let me know when the next episode comes out or the next, I'm just thinking of like Wattpad or those
Hmm.
different places where you can read the fan fictions episode by
Yep.
episode.
Yep.
Did you ever do any fiction writing or anything like that?
No, I didn't.
Yeah. Yeah, nope, nope. That one's a little harder to do, I feel like, because you're always thinking about the actual canon. Do you want to stay with canon or do you
Hmm.
want to go make up your own story? But no, that's fun.
Yeah, that was always daunting to me. So I was like, I'll just leave that where it's at.
Oh yeah, because those fans are ruthless sometimes.
Hmm.
And they are very intent on their ships, you know what I mean? Everybody
Yeah,
has like their lanes and they're like, don't mess with my ship.
exactly.
All right, now we have to know since you're a Twilight fan, we were just talking about this. Are you Team Edward or Team Jacob?
Hmm. Back in high school, I was Team Edward. I would say I'm now more Team Jacob.
That's so
Fair.
funny that I have had perception or perspective shifts like that too. Like I don't know if you guys are familiar with Gilmore Girls, but whenever I was younger, I was like Team Logan, and now that I'm an adult, I'm like Team Jess, 100%.
Yep.
Yeah, I was like that with Buffy. Like when I was younger, it was like I was all about Angel and I was so team Angel. And now as an adult, I'm like, Team Spike all the way, man. Like,
Yeah.
Yeah, that perspective shift is interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So, what kind of hardships did you have with publishing your book at such a young age? And was that your mindset of like, I'm gonna be an author, this is the end all be all, or was it like, I just gonna get this book published and then see what happens?
So I was kind of going into it with just, I love this story. This is the first one I finished. I want it out there. And
mm-hmm.
if even one person reads it, that's still a success to me. Um, and so I was researching, seeing what other people were doing, and I was like, okay, so I need a cover, I need to edit, but I was a struggling college student, so I couldn't afford to edit. Um, so I just kind of self edited myself. Um, with the cover, I had no idea where to start with hiring a cover designer. Also, didn't really have much money, so um, a friend had helped me with a stock photo situation, and then um, the quality of the photo wasn't super great. So I remember I called my cousin, kind of panicking. I'm like, hey, I want to put my book out. I don't know what to do. And I knew that she was really into photography. So I asked her, like, if she had any advice for me. And she was like, well, why don't we pack up my daughter and we'll go and we'll take a photo? And I'm like, are you serious? And she's like, yeah. So she came and picked me up. We loaded her daughter in the car. We drove to Long Beach and we did a whole photo shoot. Then we went back to her house and we went through all the photos and I picked a couple. And one of those ended up being my cover photo.
That
Is
is
really cool.
awesome. Now, so you designed it from that picture or
Mm-hmm.
was the yeah, that's so I love authors who can, they see the problem and then they find the solution and they're like, okay, I don't have the means to do this or this, but I'm going to learn, pull in someone else or, do it myself. And that's huge, especially at 19 where you're like real world's just kind of hitting you and you're
Mm-hmm.
like I'm just gonna jump into this following a dream.
Yeah, and I kind of was at the point where I was just like, I'm not gonna let anything stop me from putting this out. And I was like, well, eventually things won't be so hard. So I can always change the cover later if I want to. But for now, this is what I need to do. So I had a really, really old version of like Adobe CS3. And I did my designing in there. And I cried through trying to figure out formatting because that is still a headache that I
Mm.
cannot figure out myself. I just pay someone to do it now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
but
I'm with you on that.
back then I struggled through getting it done and it was okay. It worked out.
Yeah. Nope,
Authors
there is
do
so
have a
much that goes into
resiliency.
books. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
Yeah, it is insane to think about. I don't even think you realize it before, as you pick up a book and you read it and you're just a reader, that's not something you're considering of what all goes into making the book. But then
Mhm.
as you start to kind of pick up, okay, I want to publish this, I want to do this, and you're like, okay, what all does it take? It's a
mm-hmm.
little daunting. And for
Mm-hmm.
people who go through the entire process, bravo. That's all I have to say.
Yeah, it's definitely daunting. And I think now, as compared to 10 years ago, it's so different. And there's all these things that people are like, well, readers are expecting this. So then our list just gets bigger and bigger as time goes
Yeah.
on.
Now, how did your book do with it being, how did it do?
I think it did okay. I mean, it didn't become a bestseller or anything, but like I said, I measure success as if one person resonates with it, I'm cool with that. If I make one sale, I'm cool with that. Um, and as long as it's out there, that that is still an accomplishment in and of itself for me. So just getting it out there was the big thing.
I think we've talked about that a little bit on the show too, Randy, about the success being what you make it kind of thing, that it looks
Yeah.
different for everybody. So I think that's amazing, you know.
Yeah, yeah, that was something that we had talked about before is, it just like you said, if it reaches the one person, it's a success to
Hmm.
you. If you make one sale, that's a success for you. Even just publishing it, that is a success. And that is,
Hmm.
I love the people who have that mindset, that they have these goals that are achievable, and then if it goes beyond that, that is still under the umbrella of success.
Hmm.
Hmm. Exactly.
Yeah. No. And then also, like, another huge success from it is what all did you take away from that that you could now know differently and are able to learn from for your next one?
I mean, the biggest one was, hey, you can actually finish a book. Because before that I hadn't. So that was a huge milestone for me. And then also just kind of doing everything myself with the editing and the formatting and stuff. It was like, well, maybe I don't have to be hindered by financial barriers. I can still do this thing that I love to do regardless of anything else.
And that's amazing
Yeah.
too. You know, all the things that you learn along the way outside of the writing process.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, no, you're totally right, Ariel. Like your confidence in yourself, that is a skill. Like sometimes we lose that. Like stuff happens as children that we lose that confidence in ourselves, and then having to relearn to be confident in ourselves, publishing something and getting it out there and knowing that you can complete something, that just
Mhm.
reinforces your belief that you can do it.
exactly.
Now, you had some pretty big stuff happen. Was it shortly after the book was published, or was there a little bit of a time gap after that?
I want to say a year later, I had a pretty big change. I moved across the country from LA to Chicago. Um, and then after that, I continued publishing for a little bit. Um, and then kind of all the big stuff happened in 2018, so a few years later.
So you went on to publish multiple before you kind of took your break from writing.
Yes, I ended up publishing 5 books before I took my break.
That is awesome. Now, were they all in the same genre or the same like series?
4 of them were in the same series and in the same genre, and then another one ended up being a standalone. And that was the last book that I published before my hiatus.
Did your confidence kind of grow with each one, or was it still very? Because I mean, I'm about to publish book 5, and I'm like, I still have self doubts where I'm like, is this good enough? Am I good enough to put this out there? Are people gonna like it? Did you go through stuff like that?
Yeah, I think that never really goes away. Even 10 years later, I'm like, I I really don't know if this is going to resonate with people, but this is what is coming out at this moment, so I'm just going to roll with it.
Yeah, yeah. So then what did your writing style look like at that time? Were you still going to college and kind of juggling everything else?
I had actually taken a break from college and I started working full time. So I was juggling a full time job and writing in my downtime. So that was definitely a big adjustment because usually before I was working full time, my primary writing time was late at night.
Hmm.
And I was like, well, you can't do that. You got to get up and go to work the next morning. So I had to really readjust my schedule to be able to finish books while I was working.
And that is hugely commendable too, because just having to adjust to a completely different routine on top of that, and you know, to be able to pull from the creative pool that you have to be able to write what you want to write too. How did you manage finding both the time to write and the inspiration to write during all of that?
Honestly, I couldn't even tell you. I was kind of flying by the seat of my pants, just writing whenever I could. I had Google Docs on my phone, so I'd write a few things down on the bus ride home. Um, I would take my weekends and go to a cafe nearby and write in the cafe. Um, I I just kind of found any time that I could to write something down. And even if I was at work, sometimes I would just kind of jot a few ideas down in a notebook to come back to later, if I couldn't actually get down what I needed to.
That's awesome.
Yeah, no, I think we can all resonate with that. Like,
Mhm.
inspiration, what is that? Like you just go for it.
Hmm.
Does it look different now for you with that? Do you have, things that you do now that are different than what you did before on your process?
Yes. So with my most recent book, I actually tried outlining for the first time, which was kind of mind blowing to me. I have a friend who she swears by outlining, and we were in a Discord server together, and she mentioned that writing without an outline is kind of like showing up to a party empty handed. And that was like a mind blowing moment for me. And so I kind of reached out to her and did a consult with her, and she showed me her outlining process and how to tweak it for myself. And unfortunately, she was right, and I was able to kind of get things down better by outlining this time instead of pantsing. So I had a little bit of saltiness towards her at first, but
Yeah.
it helped out. It helped out a lot.
Yeah, see, I
Yep.
started
Nope.
as a pantser, and then I ended up
Yeah.
kind of in the middle like a plotster. So yeah, I
Hmm.
can totally relate to that.
Yeah. I was about to say the same. I think me and Ariel can both relate to that because I was a
Mhm.
pantser and then I was like, okay, I feel like I need to know what's going to happen just a little bit before I just go into this. And it's completely changed the way I do my writing.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yep. I still fly by the seat of my pants on a lot of it though.
Yeah.
Yep.
Same.
Yep. Rough outline, bare bones, and then that's about it.
Exactly.
Do you still do self editing as well, or are you more in the realm of outsourcing now?
I still do self editing. For me, I think that that's one of the expenses that everybody's each their own. For me, I can't personally justify it because it is so pricey. Um, have a household to manage, so that's not always in the budget. So when it's not in the budget, I self edit.
Now, have you taken on any like courses or anything, or you went through college, things like that? So I imagine your skill level is definitely up there higher than anyone who's just jumping in and starting to write. Did you kind of take that as a area that you wanted to focus on to make sure that you were able to self edit at your peak?
Yeah, I took a couple of courses back in 2022. Um, I use Pro Writing Aid a little bit. And then I have a couple of books that one of my editor friends recommended to me. So I use those as well. And, so far I haven't gotten any complaints.
No, I mean, I think if you put in the work to learn how to do it yourself, that is great. Now, I'm curious on this though, because like I don't think I could write, get to the end of it, and then go back and self-edit. I think I would need like a break away from it for a little bit so I could see it with fresh eyes. What is your process between finishing the last draft and then going through and editing?
I definitely take a break because it's always like I've spent months or sometimes a year or more looking at this same draft. I cannot then turn around the next day and look at this draft again. So I
Hmm.
definitely take a break. Um, Minimum time for me is 2 weeks. Like I need at least 2 weeks before I can hop back into it. And then some of the things that I do that may be different than other people when they're doing self edits, I compile it as a Kindle document and I send it to my phone and I read it on my phone. Um, because I feel like I catch something different as a reader as opposed to as a writer. So I go through and I read it and I highlight stuff. And then after I do the edits from that version, then I print it out and I literally go in with a red pen.
Yeah. So the difference, what I really want to point out here is that the difference between people who send it to an editor and the work that they're doing in it, you are paying for it still just with your time. Like the actual effort that you are putting in and the multiple run throughs you're doing, especially just how thorough you are with it, you're still paying for it. You're still putting in the quality to have it, very highly edited.
Yeah, definitely. It's very time consuming. Um, but I definitely I want to make sure I'm putting out a quality product. I never want to feel like I'm putting out less than my best.
Yeah. So how kind of tell us a little bit about, the 5-year hiatus and how that came about.
So in 2018, my mom unfortunately passed from a very long battle with cancer. And when that happened, grief kind of fuels a lot of things. Um, I realized very quickly that my mind was not on writing at all. Um, so I just kind of, it didn't really happen intentionally. It kind of happened unintentionally, where I was just like, this is not even in my periphery at this moment. Um, but I still had like this pull to create stuff. So I actually picked up a different hobby during that time. I learned how to do like modern calligraphy, um, because I kind of felt like I still love words. And so
Mm-hmm.
I would kind of letter lyrics and poetry and stuff like that. So I put all my energy into that, and I would sit down and I would try to write, but it just it just wasn't there. And so I I felt that it would be worse if I tried to force it. So I just kind of followed wherever my heart was taking me at the time. Sometimes it would lead me to write. In 2019, I started writing again, but then I would always hit like a stuck point. And once I hit the stuck point, I was like, okay, I'm just gonna leave it where it's at. I'm not going to try and force it. And eventually that led to just a few more years before I finally felt like I was ready to come back to it.
Yeah, that's totally relatable for me. My mother also passed away from cancer, and I can remember the years after. It was like everything seemed duller. Nothing was as
Mm-hmm.
bright as what it was. And so I feel like if I was to force myself to write, it would have been some very dark stories, which, a
Mm-hmm.
lot of people do, and it's great.
Mm-hmm.
I think with my mindset, if I had started that, I would have been even harder to come out of it. And so I completely understand that that's pain, and just it's almost like a veil that goes in front of your eyes of like what the world really is for a little while.
Yeah, absolutely. And I definitely agree with you that if I had tried to force it, it would have been really dark, and it it would have been harder to come out of at that point.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I commend the people who can still create whenever stuff like that happens, and sometimes that's some of the most beautiful work that they do. I'm with you though. I don't think it would have been a good place for me.
No, not at all.
But it sounds like you said you kind of followed your heart into other hobbies and other areas of interest too. So you were still working with, literary with words, and even if it wasn't on a page, So I think that's really interesting too.
Yeah, thank you. I That was something that it's still a hobby that I dip my toe into every now and again. Um, I definitely do a lot of it around Christmas time. Um, but that was always something that I wanted to learn, and it was just um, this was the perfect time to do it because I wasn't writing. So
Hmm.
I was still able to kind of fill my creative cup in that way.
It's really cool. I tried to learn calligraphy at one point in time, but I have too much ADHD to sit there and keep doing it. If it's not perfect on the first three shots, I'm done.
That's yeah, I my handwriting is atrocious, so I commend you so much
Yeah.
for being able to sit
Yeah.
down and turn that into a craft, because when I watch people do that, it is so mesmerizing and
I
fluid. And
totally watch somebody do that. It is very cool to see like the loops and the pretty like the flourishes.
Yeah,
yeah,
that's why it was so interesting to me because I would always watch it. I was like, someday I'm gonna learn when I have time. And then suddenly I had all this time. So
yeah, everyone's waiting for your Christmas cards.
yeah.
Yeah. They keep the envelope and they're like, the picture can wait.
Hmm.
No, that's really cool. I think that, do you use that? Do you ever do like personalized books that you send out? Oh my gosh, I just realized your signature is probably gorgeous.
Oh my god, yeah.
Yeah, I just changed it recently too. So yeah, my signature's pretty nice, I can't lie.
I know some
um,
authors who have hired calligraphers to create like their signature and stuff too, which I think is
Hmm.
a really interesting idea.
Yeah, for sure.
Now, like, whenever did you ever do like, I see a lot of people who will do like personalized book things that they send out and they'll write on them and things like that. Do you ever do anything like that?
I hadn't the last time I published, but I am doing it this time around with paperback orders. So I have super cute wrapping paper and I got some bookmarks printed and stuff like that. Um, and definitely there'll be a handwritten note in there as well.
I that is one thing that it's really kicking off here lately is the personalized wrapping and the personalized bookmarkers and everything. And it's like we have to go into an actual factory like assembly line now with how we do books.
Hmm. Absolutely.
So you kind of kept having things bring you down for a little while. When did, all the struggles with infertility and miscarriages kind of come into your life?
Um, so I got married 2 months after my mom passed. Um, and we we've kind of known each other since high school, so we knew that we wanted to start trying for a baby right away. Um, Unfortunately, that did not work out when they tell you in school, oh, it only takes one time. That is a lie. It doesn't always only take one time. Um, and I want to say we tried for 2 years and then a pandemic happened. And when the pandemic happened, we were like, okay, this is probably not the right time to have a baby. So let's take a break. And then we took a break and I got pregnant. And I was like, wow, okay. Um, and then I unfortunately had a miscarriage at 10 weeks. Um, and then, literally, a few weeks later, our roommates told us that we weren't going to be extending our lease. So we had 30 days to move. And so I'm like, okay, I still haven't even returned to work from my miscarriage yet. And now I have to move. So we ended up moving to Nevada, where we are now. And we've been here almost 4 years. Um, and we've been trying since then and still struggling with infertility. And that's something that definitely can take a toll on marriages. Um, and especially, me being me being grief fueled the first year of our marriage, that takes a toll as well. Um, but I definitely think we communicate very well. And um, funny story, there's actually a book that I read like the day before we got married that deals with infertility struggles, that I feel like if I hadn't read that book, I probably would have handled things differently. But seeing it fictionalized helped me realize how to stay close to my husband even while we were dealing with those struggles.
Yes, and this is something that we've talked about on the show too before is that reading hardships through books where someone else is going through them where it's you're still in a safe space. Like that stuff's not happening to you, at least not yet, or at that time, and you being able to see how a character goes through it or imagine how you would go through it. It does really set yourself up to when that does come to your door or a situation similar happens, you can have that objective perspective and be like, okay, if I'm not careful, this can ruin my marriage. And that is
Mm-hmm.
huge. And I love books that touch on those touchy subjects and show a way through it because it's very important to have that space where we can read those.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, did you did you turn to writing throughout those times or that is some very heavy stuff. What were some things that kind of, just connecting back with your husband, that sort of thing? Or how did you get through those moments?
Um, Definitely connecting with my husband a lot. Like I said, that book was really mind blowing for me, and so Um, I knew that it was important to not internalize everything. I got into therapy, so I was going to therapy every week. Um, in lockdown, I picked up watercolor painting, so I did a lot of painting, a lot of calligraphy. I also picked up mixology, so I was making margaritas and just kind of getting through life that way as well. Um, and just a lot of communication and a lot of kind of processing through creativity, whether that was painting something, um, doing lettering. Sometimes I would sit down and write, but it would be more of like a personal essay sort of thing as opposed to fiction. And it would just be like a note in my phone. But I'm definitely getting everything out, whether I was just talking to my husband about it or writing it down or something. That really helped a lot.
So what pulled you back into writing?
I don't know that something necessarily pulled me back in. I think it was always there in the back of my mind. It was just kind of waiting for me to be ready to return. And so I kind of I would write a few things here and there. I would try to pick up old projects and continue from whatever stuck point I stopped at. And it didn't necessarily always work. So then I'd start something new and then not finish. And what kind of pulled me back a little bit, I had a friend that was kind of wanting to get back into writing. She had also taken a hiatus. And so we started co writing together. And that kind of um, it felt like an easier way to both dip our toes back in a little bit. And then we took a break from co-writing, and during that break, I started writing my most recent book by myself.
I definitely think co-writing is its own art in itself. Like to be able to tell a story alongside somebody else and not just take over or let them have their space. That is an art by itself.
Mm-hmm.
I
It
feel like
definitely
there's a
is,
little
and
bit of
it's a
an
journey.
I was gonna say, I feel like there's a little bit of an accountability thing too when you co-write with somebody because it's like the little voice that says like, "Oh, I want to know what happens next," or "I need to do this to know what happens next." Whereas I feel like when you're writing by yourself, sometimes, at least for me, it's a little bit harder to stay disciplined and stay on the task. Where sometimes when you have that other person, it just kind of helps kick you into gear a little bit.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that's great. I think sometimes we need that accountability partner and that person that reminds us that this is something that we're passionate about. Because I imagine, did you ever, this is something I experienced where I would read something that my co-author would write and I'm like, oh, that gets me inspired. That I cannot wait to explore that more. Was that something you experienced?
Yeah, so I think the way that we wrote was different from how I think other co-authors write. So I've heard that some people they'll do one chapter a piece and they'll just go back and forth. I've heard that some co-authors they'll have one person write and then one person will edit and go in and add all the fluff. And for us, we tried the one chapter on, one chapter off, and it was working, but we were getting feedback from our early readers that it felt really disconnected. And so what we ended up doing was we hopped into Google Meet and I would type whatever I was thinking as far as what was coming next in the chapter, and I would send it to her. And then she would feed off of whatever I wrote, and she would send the next part. And we would just go back and forth that way until the chapter was done. And so those were the times where we were definitely feeding off of each other and being like, oh, I know exactly what's coming next, or I want to see what's happening next because we we were kind of in real time seeing what the other person was doing.
Yeah, that is a very unique. I have not heard that way before. Going about it. So you are right. I think that's a very unique way to do it. You guys pretty much. It sounds like you guys story told with each other, and then it came out. Like, was that something you guys talked about? Like voice to voice was. Oh, let's build this story out, and what does this character do, and how does this happen, and you guys built the story out, so whenever you guys are writing it, it's like just bouncing back and forth.
Yeah, it was what we co-wrote was the dystopian novels. So that involves a lot of world building, a lot of pre-planning. Um, Neither of us were very structured prior to our hiatuses. So we were like, we've never written in this genre before. We want to make sure we get it right. And so there was a lot of planning before we even hopped in to write. Um, we'd be sending voice notes back and forth to each other. We'd get on video calls to do like character backstories and stuff like that. So
Mm-hmm.
we always wanted to show up and just be able to sit down and write.
So was this wasn't your cousin, correct? This was another person that you were just friends with?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Now, tell us a little bit. I know you mentioned that, you had some really amazing support systems from cousins and other family members. How was that in the beginning of your publishing or as you came back into it?
It was both. So in the beginning of publishing, of course, I had my cousin who helped me with doing the cover. Um, a lot of my family members were very supportive of my first book and ordered paperbacks and things like that. When I moved to Chicago, I moved in with my oldest sister, and I was kind of getting pressure from everyone in my family, um, finish college and go this route. And I was kind of like, I'm just feeling like that's not my ministry right now. That's not something that I want to do at this moment. I'm like, I want to write and I want to work. So my sister was like, hey, just write and, keep applying for jobs. If you find one, you find one. But if not, I got you. And so she had three small children at the time, and she was very good about protecting my writing time. And so she'd be like, hey, at this time, your TT Jasmine's going to be in her room. She's going to be writing. She'll spend time with you when she comes out, but
Mm-hmm.
don't knock on her door. She was very much instrumental in making sure, I want to say, my next three books were written while I lived with her. And it was just that space to do what I wanted. Um, it was kind of the first time that someone told me, "Hey, you don't have to listen to everybody else, and you can do what you want to do." And I feel like that really propelled me forward in my creative process. And then once I did get my job, I met my best friend there, and she has been an amazing support from then until now. Um, every book, always supportive, to bounce ideas off of. She's the first person I send my cover to whenever I get it. Um, and she's always just been, even when I wasn't writing, she would check in on me like, hey, how are you doing? Um, are have you been feeling the pull to write? I know that's something that you love. I just want to make sure that you don't let that go forever. And
Mm-hmm.
I feel like just that gentle reminder helped so much to know that I could come back to it as opposed to being pushed. And so that, I would say, was really instrumental during my break, having someone to kind of remind me of that passion.
Yeah, and what a beautiful way to, and like I imagine that makes you feel like you're seen and they know you on a personal level that is so much deeper than everybody else.
Yeah, absolutely. It, especially when you're in a position where you're grieving and you feel like nobody sees you,
Mm-hmm.
it really feels great to get something like that from the people around you, and knowing that, hey, they do see you and they understand you and they want you to be okay.
I think too sometimes writing is such a solitary process. I mean, unless you're doing it with a co-author sometimes obviously. But for the most part, it's such a solitary process. It's people don't realize the support that we do need outside, of of that book. Because when you're writing your book, you're just, that's your world, that's your book. But outside of
Yeah.
that, to have that kind of support, and it sounds like you had a really awesome support system, for that, it can make all the difference.
Yeah, absolutely. I am definitely one of those who can hermit when I'm writing, so
Hmm.
having that support system
Hmm.
changes things.
Yeah, yeah. I think about that sometimes. I'm like, if whenever I become, big famous author where I am expected to pump out all these books and that is all I'm doing, I don't have my day job, but I'm just writing. I'm gonna be one of those authors that wants to go on retreats and like places where it's exotic stuff and I get to meet new people and see new cultures and do things as well because I'm just like you, Jasmine. I hermit. I'm like, okay, I've been in here for 8 hours. I should probably go and see the real world.
Say,
Yeah,
I like to say I
exactly.
go zombie Ariel because it's just book, 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 book. And then, like, oh, it's
Yeah.
been 4 days. I should probably go outside and get some sun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you are currently working on When It's Over, is that correct?
I have actually finished When It's Over, and it is published as of July.
Congratulations.
Yay! That is
Thank you.
awesome. Yes, congratulations. So what how was that experience getting something published again?
Um, it was fun. It was anxiety inducing. Um, Lots of self-doubt and lots of learning. It was a learning experience. Because my previous work was with the co-author, and then before that I hadn't published in 7 years. So it it was a whole learning experience doing everything by myself this time around. Um, I was writing in a new genre yet again, and so I was figuring out how to market to that genre because
Mhm.
while I do still write romance, I wanted to be very clear from the beginning that this particular story was not romance. And I have such a respect for romance authors and romance readers that I never wanted to feel like I was taking advantage of them by marketing it wrong. So there was a lot of research that went into trying to figure out how to promote women's fiction.
Mhm.
Um, so there was a lot that kind of went into this one, um, but in the end, it was fun.
That's such a growing genre too, women's fiction. It encompasses so much, I think
Yeah.
there's even like little subsets of like paranormal women's fiction and more cozy mystery stuff. What would you classify your book under? What scope of women's fiction, of subgenre?
Um,
Like, is
I
it
would.
contemporary or
It's contemporary. Yeah.
more contemporary?
Mhm.
Okay, cool.
So what inspired you to write When It's Over?
Um, so in February of, I want to say 2023, Kelsey Ballerini dropped an EP about her divorce, and I was listening to it, and one song was like an earworm for me. It was stuck in my head. I was listening to it every day. Um, and I just kept getting stuck on this one lyric. Um, and the lyric goes, I guess wrong can feel all right when you're playing home in a penthouse. And that lyric just, it was stuck in my head. And so I started thinking about the people who have what looks like a really good life on the outside, but inside, maybe it's not so pretty. Once you get behind that closed door, there are things going on that not everybody knows about.
Mhm.
And from there, I kind of fleshed things out and started exploring the story of my main character Lex, who was about to turn 30, and she had been married for a few years, and she realized she didn't want to be married anymore. And from the outside, her life looks pretty perfect, but on the inside, there are things going on that not necessarily everyone around her knows.
I love that. That is something that I think is common with a lot of authors too, is like we get inspired by some of just the one liner or the song or like I have seen a couple on the street before and like just the way that they interact with each other. I'm like, I could turn that into a story. I love that
Mm-hmm.
he, held her hand that way or rebuffed her in a certain way. It's like what we get inspired by is awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Now, did going through and writing that story, was there any, personal experiences or intertwining with things that you were going with that
Didn't get
fueled
that.
the
Did you
writing?
try again? Sorry about that.
Yeah.
What?
Alexa thinks we're talking to her.
This happens more than you know, and I'm like, I wasn't talking to you, but all right.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, there were definitely some personal experiences. When I sat down to write the very first chapter, um, which it ended up getting moved somewhere in the writing process. But
That
when I
always
first,
happens.
yeah, when I first sat down to write it, I was going through a pretty tough time in my marriage. We were having some issues with bonding and communication, and um, I had already kind of plotted the book, but this particular day, I was just really feeling super low about where I was in my own marriage. And I was like, you know what? I'm just going to write this down. And so I just started writing. The chapter flew by, and that ended up being the first thing I sent to a friend and was like, hey, can you read this? And I really intertwined a lot of my feelings at the time into the book, into how Lex was feeling, into how she made her needs known, and things like that. My husband and I did end up getting into couples therapy, and that helped a lot. And it also helped me with my writing too, to kind of figure
Mm-hmm.
out how to explore the ending of a marriage while I was fixing mine.
I
Very
love that. That is something that when people read that story and they hear the story behind it, I think that that will just help them connect with it that much more. It's like,
interesting.
because so many times it's the reverse to where there is a happy ending, but in real life it wasn't the happy ending.
Mm-hmm.
And for you guys, you wrote out the necessarily maybe not happy ending, but you guys were working to fixing the things you guys were going through.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly. And um, I think one of the big things that's been prevalent in all of my stories is I put a little bit of something that I've gone through in every single one. And for this one, it was really important to me that women felt seen, um, because I think there's this expectation that you have to wait for something big and bad to happen to walk away from a situation.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not necessarily always the case. Sometimes you can walk away just because it's not right. And in that moment when I first started writing, I was at the that crossroads where I wasn't sure if I was ready to walk away or not, if I still wanted to fix it. Um, and so in writing it, I was able to heal some parts of myself, but I want to make sure that readers know, like, I see you and I was there and I was at that crossroads where it's like
Mm-hmm.
something big and bad didn't necessarily happen, but it just wasn't working at that moment. And this is what fueled this story, was that feeling.
That is a huge message. And I even want to take it just a step further, and I'm sure you'll agree with this, is that a lot of times we are expected, if it's the little things, don't bring it up. Why rock the boat? Just let it be. Just, find something for yourself to get to distract yourself from it or whatever. But in a relationship, if there is something that comes up that is bothering you, that is something that is affecting your mental health or just not how you're wanting it to be, communicate that. Like, learn how to communicate, because that's another thing too with women is and men. I don't feel like we were taught how to properly communicate, and just talking at each other is not communicating.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And before it gets to the really bad situations, try to communicate the small things.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. That's
Yeah.
something we really had to learn, was how to communicate with each other. Um, and I agree. A lot of us are not taught that. And it's a lot of learning as you go.
Yeah. Yeah. And learning to see things from their perspective without discrediting what you're going through, right? Because one thing I experienced when I was going through my mental health journey was that I had this weird reaction that whenever my husband brought something to me and it made me upset or sad, I was like, well, that makes me feel like this. Instead of giving him that space to work through his emotions. And it happens a lot of times the other way too. Like when women bring stuff to the men, they're like, well, I can't handle that. That's too emotional. That's too whatever. And just getting to the spot where you can provide that space for your partner or teach work together so they can be that space for you of like, whatever you bring to them doesn't have to turn into now you're consoling them for their emotions.
Right.
And I think
Yeah.
sometimes that's one of those power of written word and books too. Is like you touched on this earlier, Randy. It's having that safe space, obviously to connect and be able to process that stuff. But I think sometimes people don't realize, as authors, we need to process that stuff too. And so, writing it out, it's one of those things. It's a beautiful connection because you can say, I understand too, whether you're the reader, whether you're the author, and I think that's wonderful. It's great.
Yeah, actually, Ariel, that makes a good connection in my head of like, kind of Jasmine, how we were talking about we don't know how to communicate. It's because it's not modeled for us.
Mhm.
And when things aren't modeled for us, we don't know how to do that. But like you're saying, Ariel, when we read those situations in books, that is literally it being modeled for us on how to go through it.
Yeah, agreed.
Do
That
you
is a
think that
beautiful.
Oops, sorry.
No, you're fine.
I was just going to ask, do you think that through the lens of going to therapy and working on those things, you found yourself adding some of those things, like maybe like from a therapist's point of view into the book? Because I know at least whenever I was working on some of my own stuff with the mental health angle, I tried to make sure that I put things that were like, for therapeutic references in there. Did you find yourself doing anything like that or drawing from your therapy experiences at all?
Yeah, I mean, I've been in therapy off and on since I was 11 years old. So I feel like just naturally the things that I learn in therapy always bleeds into what I write.
Mm-hmm.
But definitely being in couples therapy as well. I think unintentionally I definitely did put some stuff in there. Um, because when you're going to therapy and you're learning new things and you're trying to process things, you're not just hearing about them, you actually have to put them into practice. And so when you're putting it into practice, I think that naturally bleeds into everything else. And so yeah, there's probably some stuff in there that I didn't even realize I was putting in there, but it's there because now it's just ingrained in me.
That's awesome.
I love that. And that's so true. Like when you go to therapy and you start realizing, hey, the way that I'm communicating is actually really toxic, or the way that they're communicating is actually really unhealthy. And then you like look back at, books or movies that you used to enjoy and you're looking at them through the new scope of like, oh my God, they're treating each other so horribly.
Mhm.
Yep, that's why I'm not Team Edward anymore.
Full circle.
Hmm.
Yeah, no, it's ruined some of the things that I like used to find very like a lot of sitcoms are very hard for me to watch now because it's just so degrading to
Mm-hmm.
some
Hmm.
things. But also I feel like a lot of that content that people just they accept, right? They're like, okay, this is just funny or whatever. It gives such an undertone meaning and message to people that it's like that's not okay. I know it's funny, but you can't treat people like that.
Yeah, exactly. And I have trouble with some of the stuff I used to watch growing up too. So I totally get you.
Yep, yep. No, I think there's definitely a place for the humor and the joking, but whenever it's a societal norm, it's like, okay, how are we gonna break out of this this place that we have been in and go to the higher level? Because we're getting there. It's like we're knocking at the door of like acceptance and understanding, but we're still struggling.
Yeah.
So, that book just released on July. That is super exciting, and I want to go read it. Like that is something that I think, and that's not something I normally say, knowing that there's not necessarily a happy ending. But, um, that sounds like a really interesting book.
Thank you. I I really when I was writing it, I think I knew immediately going into it that I wasn't going to have a happy ending, because I feel like what I see a lot in the genre where people are getting divorced is the woman immediately gets into a new relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And I really wanted to focus on, she's not ending this because there's somebody else or she wants to be with somebody else. She just doesn't want to be with this person anymore, and she
Mm-hmm.
has her reasons, and it's really about her and her journey. It's not about anything else.
That is such a powerful and inspirational message, and that's why I'm interested in reading it because those books that affect my real life and the way that I see things in real life, they are treasures.
Yeah.
So, kind of tell us a little bit about where people can find that book or where they can follow you or stay in contact with you for your upcoming books or past books.
So When It's Over is available basically everywhere, I believe. It's on Amazon, Barnes and Noble. I have it on Kobo and Kobo Plus. I do have paperbacks available for purchase as well. Those can be either purchased from the selected retailer or from me directly for an autographed copy. As far as where to find me, I am pretty active on Threads and Instagram mostly. Everywhere else, I'll get on there every now and then, but I'm mostly on those two platforms.
Now, what's your handle on those?
Um, on Instagram, it's written by Jazz, and JASSS. So there's three S's because two S's was taken, which is so very annoying. And then on Threads, I'm that Jazz girl.
JAS as well.
Hmm.
Nice. Awesome. Well, Jasmine, I hope this reaches everyone that it's meant to because that is such an important story to let our women, young women, and older women, all women know that they have that space to have the feelings and not have the expectations.
Thank you. I hope it does as well.
Well, guys, I am so excited and thank you so much for listening to this episode of L3 and go check out Jasmine, go watch. Yes, eventually. Please go watch because hopefully it turns into a movie. Go read When It's Over and thank you so much for listening to this episode of L3. Hey guys, thanks for joining us on this episode of Lemon's Listening Library. Remember, every story has a journey and every journey deserves to be heard. Keep reading, keep writing, and keep listening.